So thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and moderate today's session. So good morning, everybody. As you already heard, my name is Steve Purser, and I'm Head of Operations for the European Union Network and Information Security Agency, ENISA. Who's heard of ENISA? Well, that's not bad. Who hasn't heard of ENISA? Okay, some people haven't got out the coffee break yet, so, but that's all right. Okay, listen, I think it's a really interesting subject. My own background is I spent approximately 20 years as a Chief Information Security Officer in the financial sector in various institutions. And at the end of my career, I was managing around $10 trillion of risk, so this is very high. But of course, you know, in the financial sector, we're used to these kind of figures. So I'm just pointing out that this is a key sector with you know, a lot of impact if things go wrong. So I think it's a great subject to be discussing today. A few words about the agency. So you know about ENISA, but I would like to point out a few things. We're what's called a regulatory agency, which means that we have a certain level of autonomy. And you know, we can disagree with people. We can even disagree with the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament if necessary. We don't tend to do that, of course, because we work very closely together, but you know, we do have this independent role. And I think this is very good because you know, given the kind of work we do, and I'll come back to that later, it is useful to be able to make independent statements. We're very complementary to the Commission. So for those of you who don't know the institutional framework very well, the Commission is more of a policy and legislative sort of organ, so it produces new legislation, strategy, policy, etc. And ENISA concentrates much more on practical implementation of policy. So this is something which myself and the Executive Director have really pushed these last few years, moved the agency more in this direction, because here's where we think we can add most value to the system. So we do give input into new policy, but I think in today's world, you know, the missing link, I would say, is really how do you take these rather abstract policy statements and turn them into things which really work for a reasonable amount of money and a reasonable resource commitment. And you know, as I say, 20 years in the financial sector made me realize this is really the key to a lot of things. We do sort of three types of activities. We produce a lot of recommendations, and please go to our website because everything is free. So ENISA, www.enisaeuropa.eu. And we produce a whole range of documents giving recommendations which vary from quite high-level stuff to policymakers right down to command-level things for operational communities. So you know, most people find something of interest there, and this is why we're here. So if people don't read these documents, obviously we're not doing our job. But we are changing a bit the way the agency works, and my vision as head of operations is to move us much more into practical work together with the communities. So really, you know, having my people out there talking to operational teams, learning what the problems are on the spot, in the field, and try and help find out the difference between theory and practice. I think this is really important, and we will spend more time doing this in the future. So the second area in which we do a lot of work is supporting policy. One example, the Telecoms Regulation of 2009 made security breach notification obligatory for telecoms providers. When this first happened, everyone threw up their arms in the air and said, we can never do this, it's horrible, it costs us a fortune, impossible. I'm happy to say it works very smoothly now. And actually the data we've collected is extremely useful and also somewhat surprising. When I go to communities and talk about risks in the telecom sector, quite often they get it wrong until we show the data. So it's really worth it. Yeah, we get something out of the exercise, I think, which brings value to the community. And then last but not least, ENISA, as you probably know, is the coordinator of the PanEuropean Exercise. We just finished one iteration last year where all 28 member states come together and play quite a sophisticated scenario, and it's not a desktop exercise. They're behind the desks in their home country, phoning other countries, etc. This is now, I think it's the third iteration, and it's very sophisticated and it's going very well. Probably one of the biggest cybersecurity exercises in the world. And we're also moving into training certs, we use what's called a train-the-trainer approach, where we try and pass on practical experience so that national and governmental certs can teach their communities about things which are not well documented and up and coming, I would say. So just to let you know how things sit in this, I have a team of about 50 people, which is not that big when you're dealing with the whole of European cybersecurity. So the way we work is we work very much hand in hand with you guys. And everything we do is actually done by you. Yeah, that's the secret of ENISA. Every time we produce something, it's really your work, but we put it together in such a way to make sure that it is valuable for the whole community. So any particular project will take members from different environments, perhaps public sector, private sector, specialists, legal specialists, whatever's needed to solve the problem. We work together as a team and we publish at the end of the year. But first of all, a big thank you for that, because it is your work. And secondly, that's another good reason, I think, for you going onto the website and looking at the results, because all our work is verified by quite a large community. Yeah? So it's not us as ivory tower experts saying you must do this. It's people doing the job saying you should do this. Let me just switch now, because I only have 10 minutes. So I think that gives you an idea of the way ENISA works, hopefully. And we're always looking for new collaboration and new ideas, so please feel free to contact me after this event if you think there's something we can do to help you further. We are quite unique in this role, by the way, of bridging public and private sector for these very operational sort of issues. And I would really like to build on this, so I'm always interested in new ideas. But let me switch a bit, because we're talking about security in the finance sector. I wanted to open up with a rather personal point of view. Having spent 20 years of my life in the financial sector as a Chief Information Security Officer, I'd like to give you, just as a starting point, the lessons I learned. And the lessons I learned them in a very hard way, because I got a lot of things wrong. But, hopefully, as time went on, I got better at this job. And so these are the points I put down, and I'll be very interested to see what the panel say in terms of their experience and the way forward. The number one problem, I think, is to define the problem before you start looking at solutions. You will be surprised how many people in the financial sector, at least, and in other sectors, talk about solutions before they even talk about the problems. And there's actually a good reason for that, because the market is solutions driven. And here I'm not criticizing the people who produce such solutions. They're doing a great job. But what tended to happen over the last 10, 15 years is, one of the big companies will come out with, let's say, consolidated logging, or something like intrusion prevention, and then everyone would run around saying, oh, maybe we need one of those. But that's the wrong way around, of course. It should be the requirement of driving the solutions and not vice versa. So defining the problem and making sure that the solution is solving the problem is probably the biggest lesson I learned in the financial sector. I think also one thing that really remains with me is that all solutions are a combination of three things, and now I'm really talking about once you've identified the problem, of course, and that's people, process, and technology. And again, there has been, at least in my time in the industry, a tendency really to concentrate on the latter, tools. But tools are no good if you don't use them in the right way. Let me give you an example. How many people have put in place intrusion detection systems where the bell goes off all day and nobody bothers to see what it's ringing about? Or even if they do go and see what it's ringing about, they haven't got the workflow in place to go back to the back-end system that's being attacked and talk to the system administrator and say, have you done something about it? Because these are complex processes to set up. But this is the difference, I would say, between security that looks good on the surface and security that really works in practice. I do think we've come a long way in the last few years, but I still think we have a long way to go. So putting these things together in the right way is key to good security. Now, why doesn't it happen? Because there are three keywords that I learned over my 2 years, and that's scalability, flexibility, and usability. Scalability is really important. Let me give you an example. If you've got 2 million files sitting on file servers all over the enterprise and 1,500 users, you can imagine the number of ways you compare those up. So trying to do granular access control, which is what the systems give you, is hopeless. It's impossible. So what do? We use profiles and groups, and we group everything together, and we have nice systems, but it's still really tough. So in that particular example, maybe less granularity but more control is a lot better. And I can tell you funny stories about people who spent a fortune keeping information, carefully guarded on one system, only to publish the whole thing on a data warehouse at the other end of the enterprise. It really happens. So you get these contradictions. So scalability is key. Flexibility is key in the sense that none of us can predict the world of tomorrow. So implementing solutions which are modular and which can be adapted towards new needs is really important. And in many cases, a lack of foresight and a lack of good design can lock you into a solution which is really not good for your future needs. Even though these design principles date right back until when I was a programmer, which is sort of middle 80s. So we've had the ideas for a long while. Implementing them is a lot tougher. And of course, usability. A lot of security, and this is really getting better, but it still needs to get a lot better, is not particularly matched to the needs of the user. You know, you can still find, if you go into enterprises today and you talk to the guys working behind doing a normal everyday business function, or the lady that's working on another business function, quite often they don't really understand the principles underlying the security, and procedures are just something they follow, and that's just not good enough. Yeah? We cannot survive in a digital world with that kind of knowledge. So these three things are key, I think. So my very last comment is that the last thing I learned before I left industry was that you have an almost impossible task as a Chief Information Security Officer. You have to do lots and lots and lots and lots of things, and you never have enough people or money, of course. So prioritization and good management is key. And what I would encourage people to do on the basis of my experience is to work on two separate axes, if you like. One of which is the strategic axis. So this is producing policies and architectural documents and all the things which will make you grow in a steady and coherent way. But the other axis, so consider it as a sort of vertical axis, and then your horizontal axis will be your tactical approach. What do you do when you have an emergency tomorrow? Why do you do that? Because if you do not assess how you can repartition your staff between these two activities, it can be really difficult to manage life. Yeah? So, if you know, for instance, and this will be quite typical, you probably spend 60% on tactical and 40% on strategic, then you can apportion your resources appropriately, and you can actually get something done. If you get that equation wrong, well, either you're always transferring people over from strategic stuff to do the messy everyday stuff, or the other way around. So thinking in terms of both dimensions is really important, and it's part of the key of growing the enterprise, I think. Now, all that is worth very little, because I'm not a Chief Information Security Officer anymore, and these are the guys that count, but it's a bit to stimulate the debate and to look at, not only what are the problems on the surface, because they vary from day to day, but the problems I'm talking about now do not vary a lot. They've been here ever since I can remember, and will probably be here for the next few years as well, because they're very tough problems, and they're at the heart of everything we're doing.